Hello and welcome to the actually already second time I look back on my gaming year on this channel. I hope you all had great holidays and spent some quality time with your families and loved ones. So before we get into the list, I want to structure this year's video a bit different. First, I want to give you the main list of every game I finished in 2024 that has left my backlog and didn't release this year. And in addition to that, I want to add two smaller lists I want to talk about separately. One for all the games I platinumed this year, and one where I ranked the games that came out this year and I played this year. So without further ado, the first game I finished in 2024 was the game I mainly played over the last holiday season. And that is Tales of Berseria, a beautiful action RPG developed and published by Bandai Namco. The game follows the story of a group of outcasts around the protagonist Velvet, a young woman that got betrayed and left to die by the person she trusted the most. The group that keeps growing the more and more the story goes on, then sets out on a journey to ultimately save the world in the end. And all of that despite the people around them still seeing them as the villains. The gameplay in Tales of Berseria at first seems like typical hack and slash combat, and that is pretty much accurate for the most part. When you engage with foes on the overworld, you will be put in a smaller area where you can unleash your combinations of attacks and abilities onto the enemies. But even though this sounds quite basic, the game manages to keep the combat engaging through varying enemy types and a well-paced power curve that doesn't force you to grind and treats you with new abilities for all your party members from time to time. And while the story and gameplay are already really good, my favorite part of the game is probably the cast. That is nothing like your typical fantasy story where a group of heroes destroys the big evil with the power of friendship. They don't join Velvet because they want to help her, they join her either for her own gain or because they have no other option or nothing else to lose, like Velvet herself. And that felt kind of refreshing. So if you are like I was and still haven't tried this game out, and if you like action RPGs, I think you won't be disappointed when you give Tales of Berseria a chance. My gaming year continues with my usual routine after finishing bigger lengthy titles, where I play much shorter games in between. This time I chose a game that was on my wishlist for a while and happened to be on sale at the right time, and that is Valhalla. In the game you play as the bartender Jill that works at the Valhalla bar. The gameplay is pretty limited, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. You make strings, talk to people and choose dialogue options. But the main dish is the story, which doesn't follow an overarching narrative but consists of the stories and struggles of the people that visit Jill's workplace. So if you are in the right mindset for a short cozy game that you can easily finish in a few evenings, Valhalla is a good choice. Next we come to a game that again was more of a palate cleanser between much bigger games, and that is Driver San Francisco. The so far last main entry from a series that was famous for having such difficult tutorials that some people weren't even able to play the game itself. In this entry you play as an undercover police officer called John Tanner, who, after a car crash, gains the ability to shift into and control other people. And the entire game revolves around this gameplay aspects. For example, when you chase people you can activate the shift, which then slows down the time, so you can choose a car to shift into and then you can just crash that car into the one you are chasing to stop it. Or in street races you can manipulate your opponent this way as well. This, in combination with the creativity and variety in the activities, made this game really enjoyable. Even the story is quite engaging for a racing game, so if you find it for cheap anywhere, you should definitely go for it. Inspired by the fun I had with Driver San Francisco, the next game I caught up on was MotorStorm Apocalypse, a title from another series that sadly hasn't gotten a new entry in way over a decade. In the story mode, you play as 3 different drivers that also each represent a step up in difficulty. The races themselves, however, are always really chaotic in a good way, with things like people throwing Molotov cocktails at drivers, buildings collapsing or helicopters crashing, just to name a few. But if you would like a challenging arcade racing experience, I think you should look elsewhere. Because despite some motorcycle races that controlled horribly, I often won the races first try even though I didn't know what was going on. Anyway, if that's not the case and you just want some chaotic fun, MotorStorm Apocalypse is more than a decent game. Again 2 console generations ago, the Yakuza developers released a game called Binary Domain. A game set in a dystopian future where massive floods destroyed most of the world we know today, and humanoid robots have taken over most manual labor. You play as a member of an international special force that infiltrates Japan to capture a man responsible for an attack by one of those androids. The gameplay itself, 99% of the time, consists of cover shooting combat with a few dialogue options in between. But that doesn't mean it's bland. I wouldn't have finished it if that were the case. Instead, the developers implemented a dismembering system that made every shootout feel very satisfying. And on top of that, you have some boss fights against giant machines that look incredible. The whole game actually looks really good for a title on the PlayStation 3. Sadly, the boss fights had no real twist to defeating them. It always came down to shooting certain parts with a rocket launcher. And while the game looked really nice, the performance, especially in the boss fights, was sometimes horrible, which resulted in some really frustrating game overs. All that aside, I had my fun with this game, especially the presentation blew me away a few times, but there are definitely better cover shooter options out there. The next game is from a genre I probably wouldn't have touched if it weren't for the co-op action. Because Outriders to me wasn't anything special. It looks average, has no incredible story or gameplay, and looter shooters are just not my type of game overall. So if it weren't for my brother, I wouldn't be mentioning this game right now. But to be fair, playing around with the special abilities and just fighting wave after wave of enemies with a co-op partner has its charm. So if you have someone to play it with, the game is still solid without any bugs or major issues. Just don't expect anything more than that. At the beginning of summer of this year, I had a phase where I was really into playing action adventures set in feudal Japan. And the first one of these games for today is TrackTribe, a 2.5D black and white action adventure set in feudal Japan. You play as a young warrior that is looking for the man who burned down his hometown and murdered his loved ones. What I really liked about TrackTribe is that it uses the missing colors to its advantage to craft a really intense atmosphere throughout the entire game. Paired with the simple but satisfying combat system containing of heavy and light attack combinations and several ranged attacks, you get a really solid action platformer. After a few smaller games, we come to a game that, if it would have come out in 2024, it would be a very strong contender for a Game of the Year for me. And that is Grand Theft Auto 4. And even though I was nowhere near old enough to play it on release, I'm still kinda ashamed it took me over 16 years to finally play it. And oh boy, the story of Nico Bellic, an immigrant and war veteran from Eastern Europe, seeking a better life and revenge in the United States, just for everything to get worse from the moment he leaves the ship, is, aside from Red Dead Redemption 2, to me, the best thing Rockstar Games has to offer when it comes to storytelling. And gameplay-wise, the only thing that felt a little bit outdated were the hand-to-hand combat sections, but everything else, like the shootouts, had always felt amazing. Like when you had to go inside a building full of enemies and you always had to really pay attention, because there could be a guy with a pump gun behind every corner and completely deleting you. And the driving felt ridiculously good, especially for a game released in 2008. And the amount of details, like some cars having a speaking navigation system with different voices for certain car brands, is a level of detail that even GTA 5 is missing. Just thinking about the game makes me want to do an entire video about it. But anyways, if you're one of the 3 people that likes open world games and hasn't played GTA 4 yet, dust off your old PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 or PC and enjoy one of the best games of all time. Following such a heavy hitter, I played through Starhawk, a very unique PlayStation 3 exclusive shooter. But the story is definitely not what made this game stand out. Instead, it is the fact that calling it a shooter doesn't do the game justice. You have so much gameplay variety, ranging from elements of real-time strategy and tower defense, to battles in mechs that can transform into spaceships, adding another aspect to it. It's just really impressive how they managed to put so much different gameplay types in the only around 6 hours it takes to finish the story mode. And it's somewhat sad that the developers Lightbox Interactive hasn't used their creativity in another standalone game ever since. But again, anything else in Starhawk isn't anything special in my opinion, and I wouldn't say you should buy a PlayStation 3 just for this game. But if you own a PlayStation 3 already and look for something unique, if you find it for a few bucks, grab it and give it a go. A game that also includes mech combat but gave me an experience that is superior in every aspect is the fantastic 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim from the brilliant minds at Vanillaware. The game is set in an alternate version of Japan and follows the story of 13 young adults and teenagers. The game is split into 2 parts, the real-time strategy mech battles where you select your team and upgrade their equipment to be ready to fight the hordes of kaijus, and the adventure mode where you walk around beautiful sceneries and discover the stories of each of the 13 characters in an episodic manner. On top of that, you get the beautiful art style that Vanillaware is famous for, and an atmospheric soundtrack to underline every situation. 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim is one of the few games that actually left me with post-game depression when the credits rolled. because it really managed to get me invested in the story and its characters. And if you want to hear me talk about the game for an entire video, I made a review for it a few weeks ago, so feel free to check it out. I will put the link in the description. The Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel is one of those games I really wanted to play but always dropped for a while for one reason or another. But this year I finally managed to finish my first entry in the long-running Trails series. And if what this game implies turns out to be true, this series has one of the best extensive stories I have ever seen in a video game franchise. The game is set in a fictional nation inspired by Central Europe on the brink of war. You play as the son of a low-ranking noble called Reen Schwarzer, who enrolls at Thor's military academy. In the game you travel with your classmates through the different regions of your country and solve the locals' problems. The gameplay consists of turn-based combat with a big twist being an emphasis on positioning yourself right to get an advantage. Sadly, some of the bosses gave me a real hard time, which is the reason I dropped the game a few times. But with a few tips and tricks I found online, I was finally able to finish Trails of Cold Steel. And I think if you look for a turn-based RPG with a very interesting world, you should give the Trails series a chance. The final game for this list today is the remake of the survival horror classic Dead Space from EA, in which you play as the mechanic Isaac aboard a spaceship called the Nishimura, where something caused the crew to mutate and become hostile. To make your way through the dark corridors of the Nishimura, you not only have to fight grotesque mutants with a variety of tools and weapons, the game also consists of several riddles that often play around with gravity in one way or another. But what really impressed me in this game is how it utilizes everything to create an intense atmosphere and terrify you that way instead of just jump scares or having monsters chase you. Especially the sound design and architecture are so well made that even without enemies nearby, I sometimes found myself at the edge of my seat. The game even breaks with the concept of save points by making enemies appear and attack you while you think you can take a break, leading the player to never feel safe anywhere. Because of this game is a good example for why video games are an art form different to anything else out there. Now, after the list of games that I finished in 2024 that have come out that year, we now come to the short list of titles I 100% completed. And starting off the list is a game that probably no one ever has heard about before, and that is the indie platformer Hymno. In the game you control a nameless figure with basic moves like a jump, a wall jump and a dash through endless generated levels. In the background plays a mix of rain sounds and a bass-heavy soundtrack. The developer of the game describes it on Steam as a zen platforming game. The Platinum Trophy itself is really nothing special. After playing for 30 minutes, it came automatically. I haven't bought this game with the intention to get the Platinum Trophy for it. It is one of those games I bought this year when looking through the games for less than 50 cents on sale. And Hymno happened to be looking interesting enough. Also, I wouldn't even recommend this game to you, even though it costs next to nothing. Because after 10 to 15 minutes, you have seen anything this game has to offer. Next up we have a game that I played immediately after getting my PS5, because the game pre-installed with every console, and that is Astro's Playroom, a small platforming game that is a playable homage to everything PlayStation, and a technical showcase especially for the DualSense controller. You navigate your little asteroid through 4 different worlds, themed around a former console generation each, and every stage in this game just gives you something new, and it's all just positive vibes and nostalgia, even though I was not even alive when the first 2 PlayStation consoles released. But despite its colorful look, Astrobot is not made solely for kids. It still has enough of a challenge to never get boring. In the final boss, I even needed a few tries. All in all, an extremely enjoyable Platinum Trophy, where you only have to play through the game and pick up some collectibles. So if you own a PlayStation 5 and haven't played this game yet, you're definitely missing out. The third game that joined the 100% club is My Big Sister, an indie horror adventure game from a single developer where you play as a young girl on a mission to save her sister from a group trying to sacrifice her. This is another one of those 50-cent games from the PlayStation Store, but this time there's actually a bit more substance. And even though the gameplay is limited to exploring the areas and collecting items to advance, the story, while not taking itself seriously, was good and short enough that in the end I went back and got all the endings, which then unlocked the Platinum Trophy for me. Again, this game is not really a challenging Platinum, with only a few collectibles to miss and a chapter select. But in contrast to Hymno, this game has much more content. And now for the fourth and already last game in Platinum this year, we have Lollipop Chainsaw, a game by the Da Vinci of crazy Japanese video games, Suda51, that I completely fell in love with this year. You play as the high school girl Juliet Starling that, on her 18th birthday, finds her school overrun by zombies that have been summoned by a social outcast trying to get his revenge that way. And because Juliet is part of a family of zombie hunters, she, with the help of her sisters, her dad and her boyfriend's head, fights her way through the different stages. And what I liked about this game is the amount of variety and creativity throughout each level. Each stage is themed around a boss that all have a different gimmick to them. On top of that, you get several mini-games like mowing a field of zombies with a harvester that are just stupid fun. And just being fun is probably the best way to describe the entire game. From the flashy, over-the-top effects when you defeat the zombies with your chainsaw, the new abilities or combos you unlock, to the creativity throughout the entire game were just so much fun to me that I would platinum it again, to be honest. So if you are looking for an insanely fun platinum experience, do yourself a favor and try Lollipop Chainsaw. And now for the last list, we come to my personal Game of the Year ranking. But before we start, keep in mind that this list is just my opinion, and if a game is not featured in my list, I just haven't played it yet. So in last place for this year, we begin with Infinity Nikki, one of the many open world gacha games we got throughout the last few years. What puts it in last place for me is just that it is completely not my thing to collect items, craft dresses and make my character pretty. The game itself looks actually quite good. I had no technical issues and the combat worked for what it was. The gameplay purpose and the story just wasn't fun for me, which puts Infinity Nikki in last place on my list. One place higher is the free-to-play football game UFL, where you build your team by buying new players with money you earn by playing online against other players. And I actually had a bit of hope for this game, but the slow progression and the lack of gameplay variety made me drop the game again very fast, which results in the 13th place. Another multiplayer title that was actually quite fun in the beginning, but couldn't keep me engaged for long, is Ubisoft's multiplayer shooter XDefiant. In the game you play in team-based modes like Team Deathmatch with different classes from Ubisoft-owned IPs, that all have different abilities like firebombs or hacking. And to be fair, I think nothing in this game is actually bad, but as I mentioned before, it just couldn't keep me engaged. And as it seems I'm not the only one that feels that way, because the game is already going to shut down its servers in June of 2025. Taking the 11th spot on the list is Yas Rising, a new interpretation of the arcade classic Yas Revenge from Atari. In the game you play as a young girl fighting against an evil corporation in the dystopian future. And the gameplay mix is actually quite fun. You have classic platforming and combat with new abilities to unlock throughout the game. You have a hacking minigame that is an homage that plays like the original Yas Revenge, and you have the boss fights that, while being really challenging, are well designed and probably my highlight of the game. And for a budget title that cost like $30 on release, the game actually has more than enough to offer. But sadly, because I rarely see anyone talk about it online, I think that it was not the biggest success sales-wise. And we might not get another game like this from Atari anytime soon, which would be a shame in my opinion. The top 10 starts with the most recent game on today's list, Marvel Rivals, a third-person hero shooter that deserves the name like none other. As the name suggests, you play as one of many characters from the Marvel universe, that, typical for the genre, fall under one of three categories: DPS, tank or support. What I really liked about the game, besides the character's abilities, is that unlike other similar multiplayer games, losing isn't as frustrating, which I think is because if you have no chance, the matches are over really quick. All in all, this game was a welcome breath of fresh air, and I had quite some fun with it for a few weeks. At number 9 is a game that was nominated for Game of the Year, Balatro, the indie poker roguelike developed by a single person. The gameplay loop consists of building a card deck to build better poker hands, to get enough points to exceed a certain score and advance to the next round. To do so, you don't only have the standard cards. Each card can have a special effect like a multiplier or money to buy jokers. Aside from your deck, you can buy bonus cards like jokers that boost your point multiplier under certain conditions. You can buy upgrades for certain cards, or cards that upgrade the multiplier for poker hands. And this loop of upgrading your deck and trying to get a better run is what so many people find very addicting. For me it wasn't that captivating, but I found Balatro to be the perfect title for a quick round in between. In 8th place is another gacha game. And most of the time I play this type of games for a while and drop them as soon as they are starting to bore me. But with this game I found myself coming back again and again for an hour or two, till I played through everything the game had to offer at release. And don't get me wrong, the game is far from perfect, but I really liked how fast-paced and smooth the combat felt, and that you actually have a lot of content and variety besides the main story. like character-specific stories, mini-games in an arcade, classic side missions, and a lot of challenge missions. Also, I found the gacha mechanics to be kind of tame in Thunderstone Zero, because I got both new characters that released in the time I was playing, without even trying. So I think for a free-to-play action RPG, Thunderstone Zero is actually a decent game. At number 7 is another game I played due to me craving sword combat action games set in feudal Japan, and that is Rise of the Ronin. In the game you play as one of 2 siblings training to become samurai. But when your hometown gets burnt down and your sibling sacrifices himself on a mission, you become a Ronin. And while the combat did not feel as smooth as the combat in Ghost of Tsushima for example, it still got the basics right. And in combination with the various weapons and the challenging boss fights, the gameplay is more than enough to keep it engaging. On top of that, I really like that the story offers the freedom to choose if you want to be on the side of the colonizing faction or the rebels. And the decision wasn't always as easy as it sounds, because it sometimes was a decision for the lesser evil instead of good or bad. So if you want a good open world samurai/Ronin game before Ghost of Yotai, Rise of the Ronin is a good choice and my 7th place. Just missing out on the top 5 is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, a game that probably is the game of the year for many people, and I get why. The world, the graphics, the story, the characters, the soundtrack and the presentation are even better than in Remake. But there also were issues I did not have in the first part, like the forced minigames or the open world with the most basic repetitive checklist activities ever. And my biggest problem that is completely personal is that the combat did not click with me. I just couldn't get into it. So at some point I just lowered the difficulty and enjoyed the fantastic story and beautiful world this game has to offer. And I'm still looking forward to the third and final part of the Remake trilogy. The first game of the top 5 is a game that many people expected to never happen, because Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 released almost 13 years after the first game, and once again puts you in the heavy shoes of Space Marine Titus, who this time instead of orcs faces hordes of Xenos and armies of chaos. And the gameplay is so satisfying with the amount of finishing moves, weapons and over-the-top violence the game delivers so much mindless fun. The only downside is that the game is quite short, like 6 hours, and the multiplayer really lacks content. Especially in the PvP modes, there were like 3 maps and 3 game modes on release. But if that doesn't bother you, Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 is a fantastic experience, especially in co-op mode with up to 2 friends. Just missing out on the bronze medal is my most anticipated game of the year, Metaphor ReFantasio. As a Persona fan, I was really looking forward to this new fantasy IP, and for the most part, it delivered. The art style is beautiful, the presentation is fantastic, the characters and the story are well written, and the road trip feeling of the game was a fresh new approach for Atlas. Also, the addition of job classes called archetypes that give you the option to change all of your party members' magic abilities, unlike in the Persona series, was also a great new addition. On top of that, it excluded my least favorite thing about the Persona series, with the dating aspect. So why is this game in 4th place, you may ask? And the reason for that is the endgame. Because from a certain point on late in the game, I felt like I was the only one playing by the rules. The amount of times opponents just nullified all magic attacks or just gave themselves like 4 extra turns felt just cheap. Because they only made each encounter last longer instead of adding a challenge. Which resulted in me not wanting to play more when the credits rolled, like I would with other titles from Atlas, even though I had an absolute blast for 90% of my playthrough. The actual 3rd place is a game I had the most fun with playing with friends in years, and that is Helldivers 2, a game that I had never heard of before it went viral. But the combination of pure chaos, ragdoll physics and ridiculous patriotism were just so much fun. My friends and I almost exclusively played Helldivers when we played together for a few months. And the fact that they are constantly adding new content for free, even the cosmetics are all unlockable by playing, is a big plus as well. And to be fair, the gameplay isn't the most responsive, but that is part of the fun. You're supposed to feel helpless when you ragdoll over the map because one of your friends called an airstrike on your position. A deserved number 3, Helldivers 2. The silver medal in my Game of the Year ranking goes to Stellar Blade, a game that I was too harsh to in my initial review. Because I got lucky and the shop I ordered it from sent it out too soon, and I played it without the day 1 patch. Which is the reason why I encountered several bugs like the game not recognizing where I was jumping or the game crashing completely. I also faced some input lag or performance issues, which was frustrating in a game with a combat system based on precise movement. But I played the game again for a bit this year, and everything that annoyed me was patched, and everything was perfect besides the dialogue with some characters. Adam still has the charisma of a piece of drywall, but the enemy design, the side quests, the music, and especially the sceneries in this game are so beautiful. I'm actually thankful for Stellar Blade, because it is probably the closest thing to a new Nier game we will get anytime soon, and I'm looking forward to Shift Up's future projects. And the winner of my personal Game of the Year award is the remake of the third entry in the Persona series, Persona 3 Reload. And yes, that teenage girls fall in love with the protagonist after talking to them for a few times is still awkward. But that's the only negative thing I can think of. For one, the gameplay always felt so smooth because of the animations, and the opponents always felt perfectly balanced and brought new challenges every time you go higher on the Tartarus. And the boss fights, especially the additional optional challenges that let you fight multiple bosses in a row, offered a nice additional change of pace every now and then. Also, the music, especially the battle theme, It's Going Down Now, is still in my head after almost a year. On top of that, the writing not only in the main story is just perfect. When I think about Junpei and Chidori or the ending, I still get goosebumps. When the credits rolled, I just felt empty, and I literally took a break from story-heavy games from the end of February until I played Final Fantasy Rebirth in May. Just thinking about it now, I feel like I have to make an entire video about this game soon, because I just feel the need to talk about it in detail. To me, not only one of the best RPGs out there, but one of the best games I ever played. Persona 3 Reload. So if you watched until now, first of all, thank you for that. What games did you finally caught up to in 2024? And what were your favorite games of the year? If you have the time, feel free to tell me in the comments. And if you liked what you see, maybe consider liking and subscribing, and I hope to see you next time.